Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the Montreal Canadiens heading into this year's trade deadline. What are my predictions? Because I think that the Canadiens could be really interesting. They could either be pretty active at this year's deadline or fairly quiet, depending on where they want to make more moves. So they want to make more moves at the deadline this summer. I think this is going to be a big year for the Habs, but we're going to take a look at what could be done here ahead of the March 3rd, 3 o'clock deadline. So we're going to start off with some of the guys that are available, where they've been linked to, and potentially what they could get for these players. So we're going to start off with Monahan. Now, Monahan is they got a really good move out of Monahan. They basically got a first-round pick from Calgary just to take on his salary, and I think that was the best thing they could have done. He played higher minutes in Montreal. He was healthy for the most part. And I think they could end up getting a first or second round pick to traded for him. And I think that's really a good thing here for the Montreal Canadiens. Really good asset management there by Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton there. With that said, who are some of the teams that could be interested? I think there's going to be a handful of teams that'll be interested. The Colorado Avalanche, the Minnesota Wild, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Carolina Hurricanes. I think all of those teams are looking for the potential to be a good second, third pairing center. I think that's really where Monahan fits at this point. And again, for a first and second round pick, potentially, it could be quite expensive. But I think if you could get a second round pick from Monahan, if you somehow get a first, that's miraculous. If you could get a second round pick for him, I would still take that and be quite happy with that. I think that's a really good move for the Habs if they can get that for him. Jonathan Drouin, different story for Drouin. It's been a rough career for him in Montreal, and things have not worked out. And he's you're getting a depth draft pick for him if you trade him at all. His salary doesn't really help him. His health status has really been the biggest issue. He hasn't been healthy and in the lineup. So how are you going to trade for a guy as a rental if you haven't seen him on the ice in 2 months? It's going to be difficult to do. That's where Drouin sits right now. And even when he is in the lineup, not very productive. He could potentially be a good depth pickup for teams that don't pick up a good winger that they wanted. And that's where I think teams like the New Jersey Devils, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Winnipeg Jets, the Minnesota Wild, the LA Kings, if they miss out on Timo Meier, they could end up going toward a guy like Jonathan Drouin as a really last-minute, down-to-the-wire option just to pick up an additional forward. That's really what that comes down to. Joel Edmundson is in a pretty good spot. He might end up being their most valuable asset at this year's deadline. He has one more year left on his contract. Huge benefit there. He could potentially go for as much as a first-round pick and a prospect. I think that's really what the Habs are looking for Edmundson. I think a couple teams will be interested, especially in the fact it's a 2-year situation here where it's this year and next year. I think the Winnipeg Jets and the Washington Capitals will be at the forefront for a guy like Joel Edmundson. Really good asset for this team. And I think that Montreal, as much as they don't want to give him up, the idea of a good prospect and another first-round pick is something that is going to probably tempt them to make that move. And I think it's a strong move, it's a good move, and is something that Joel Edmundson is a good player. He's a very good playoff performer. We saw what he did in 2019 with the St. Louis Blues, winning that Stanley Cup. He has that pedigree under him. I think he's going to end up going to one of those teams. I think he's a great addition. Those teams have the assets to get that deal done. And Montreal has the availability. If they want to retain a lot of cap, it makes it a lot easier for a team like Washington even to be in that sweepstakes. Christian Dvorak. Kind of interesting with Dvorak. He's had kind of a weird career in Montreal. Definitely a forced situation with their former GM in Marc Bergevin. I think they could end up getting a second-round pick for him. I know that, Habs fans don't want to hear that with what Bergevin gave up for him, but that's really what he's worth. And I think a lot of teams will be interested. Again, you're looking for center depth. I think, obviously, the Carolina Hurricanes, definitely looking for that market. A good depth center, Minnesota, Vegas, and even the Calgary Flames could be a player for a guy like Christian Dvorak. I think he fits really well with the style of their head coach there. I completely forgot his name. You guys know, the LA Kings former head coach. Christian Dvorak would be a great fit in his system. And I think that's really where you're looking at for Dvorak. I think he's a guy that, again, for a second round pick, it's not too bad. For the Habs, they pick up something. And, he has the potential to be a great player. We saw what he did in Arizona. He was a good player in Arizona. Just things have tailed off for him. And I think that a change of scenery is what he needs here. And the Habs might be able to fetch a second or probably more likely, realistically, a third-round pick. But I think that's still worth something to the Habs and this fan base trying to build up more of that prospect and draft pick, that little bit of a depth to that group. Who are the Habs' targets? Now, this is more on the buyer side of things because similar to a video I just did on the Senators, I could see the Habs potentially being a buyer as well. Not in the sense of picking up rentals or anything like that, but picking up guys with maybe a year or two left on their deal, right? Like contract ends in 2024, and they want to see what these guys got. And if they could be a good long-term fit for the Habs, because you need players to develop around Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Arbor Jacki, and some of the younger guys you already have. So that's why I think, especially on the forward side of things, they could add another good right winger to play on this team. And specifically, I have 3 players in different points in their career, but I think really interesting players that could be a good match for the Habs. This is a deal more likely to happen in the summer, honestly, but these could be potential trade deadline moves as well, or at least preliminary talks to what they could do into the summer. So the first guy we're going to talk about is Sam Reinhart of the Florida Panthers. The Panthers have made it clear they are looking to move out some cap space, whether that's a Sam Reinhart or a Bo Bennett. I think Sam Reinhart is a better fit for the Montreal Canadiens. He was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres, so the Habs have seen a lot of Sam Reinhart in his NHL career before he went to Florida. Sam Reinhart could be a guy that ends up being a great player long-term on the second or third line of the Habs, but I think even as soon as next year, he could be on the first or second line right out of the gate. And I think with Sam Reinhart, it's not going to cost you that much because, again, Florida's trying to dump off the salary a little bit, so they're not going to give him up for nothing, but it's going to be easier to acquire Reinhart. And when Montreal's moving out all of this salary, it might be easier for them to say, listen, we'll take on the salary, but it's going to, you're not going to get as much for him because you're not retaining anything. And I think that's what you're looking at from Reinhart. Montreal may be able to benefit from having the cap space that Florida doesn't, and will have that little bit of leverage in a deal. Anthony Beauvillier, I think, is a really interesting one because the Islanders just traded him to Vancouver, and his contract ends next summer in 2024. And what's interesting with Beauvillier is the Habs have always been in on Beauvillier. They've been tied to Beauvillier for the last 2 years, and that's why the Islanders trading him isn't the most shocking thing. But I think that Anthony Beauvillier to the Montreal Canadiens is a real possibility. I really think there's something to it. And, I think there could be a time when, Pierre-Luc Dubois and Beauvillier next summer both go to Montreal. And I think that's a real possibility. But if teams want to trade those guys for something, knowing he'll probably go to Montreal anyway, maybe you take a second or third round pick and just give them up. That way you get something for those guys for a place they would have probably gone anyway. So I think Anthony Beauvillier to the Montreal Canadiens, a really good player. His inconsistency is what's so frustrating about Beauvillier. But when he's on his game, he is really, really good. And, of course, I always have a spot in my soul for that guy scoring the Game 6 winner, the last goal at Nassau Coliseum with the New York Islanders. Beauvillier is a great dude, and I wish the best for him. Also, Kaapo Kakko. Now, Jeff Gorton drafted Kaapo Kakko when he was with the New York Rangers. I think that's a really interesting one here as well. I think Kakko to the Montreal Canadiens, the Rangers have a plethora of good forwards already there, and potentially adding more. I think Kakko could be really interesting. Again, Gorton has that connection with him, drafted him, and the Rangers could be able to get something from the Habs that they could use as depth. And I think that when you look at the Rangers and the Habs, we talked about this last summer, they're a great trade partner between the two of them. And I think there is a real possibility we see a deal get done. I really like the idea of Beauvillier or Kakko going to the Habs and filling out that top 6, specifically on the right side next season. So guys, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you think of the Montreal Canadiens going into the trade deadline? And do you agree or disagree with some of my thoughts? Leave some mock trades as well down below. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.